All right, the Buffalo Sabres have been exciting to watch as of late, and not just because of their first overall guys showing up and doing first overall things. Cough cough, Owen Power, I see you buddy, but today I didn't want to talk about him in this video. Instead, what I wanted to do was go over to the 2019 NHL Draft and talk about some of the classes of players that existed in this selection of guys. Now, the reason I say it like that is because when it came to 2019, we had talked about this in a video a few days ago, actually, but when it came to the 2019 draft, there were a lot of different classes of players that sort of presented themselves right up front. You had yourselves the prospects out of the junior NTDP system, so Jack Hughes, Caulfield, Turcotte, Zegras, Boldy, York, Spencer, Knight, all a part of the same team, and they're all very good prospects too, or prospects turned players, I should say. Instead, it's been a few years since that draft, so a lot of these guys are no longer prospects, but those guys presented themselves as a good class of guys. You had the Europeans coming over here, of course, the Capo Kakos of the world, the Vasily Podkolzins and the Philip Brobergs that entered the mix, not to mention Moritz Seider, who was a very big underdog that went in the top 10, and then you had yourselves the WHL guys. And this was particularly interesting because the WHL is never really a lock to having an extended amount of guys at the very top of the draft. Like, there are some years, like this year, for example, 2023, where you've got a few of them. Zach Benson, Andrew Crystal, Connor Bedard, all at the top of the 2023 draft. There are other years where the first WHL guy doesn't get taken until sometime after the top 10. The 2020 draft comes to mind because Seth Jarvis was the top guy there. He was taken 13th. There are a few years where WHL prosperity is reigning true. There are others where it's not that strong. But 2019 was seen as a draft where you had 3 WHL guys that could have been potentially top 10 talents, just to say. The reason we're making this video is because 2 of them are on the Buffalo Sabres right now, and they are doing extraordinarily well. Let's not talk about Kirby Dach, who had went 3rd overall, but instead go over the other 2 WHL phenoms in Dylan Cozens, who was a 7th overall pick by Buffalo, and PEYTON KREBS, who was taken 10 picks after by the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, I will say that putting these guys under the same boat for 2022-2023 is probably the wrong move, because if you go over to point production, you could definitely see that one is producing a lot better than the other, but when it comes to the recent developments of the latter, there is a really good amount of progress that we have seen the past little while here, which is why I think it's noteworthy to make in this video at the very least. So let's start off by talking about the guy that was initially a Sabre from the very beginning, and a player who is a point-per-game guy this season. Dylan Cozens, the workhorse from Whitehorse, the best hockey player to come from that part of Canada. He's 21 years old right now, 6'3", 187 as a right-handed player, and when it comes to that nickname, the workhorse from Whitehorse, that's kind of an indicator as to what this player is out there on the ice. Just an absolute beast. He goes out there, he works hard, he's actually developed his two-way game a tremendous amount the past 12 months or so, and it's really showing off in the way that he's able to interact with opponents in both his own zone and the offensive zone. When it comes to swatting pucks away from opposition, freeing up passing lanes, and just making things difficult for the opposition, he's doing a really good job at opening things up for his own team and creating turnovers because of it. We had already talked the other day about the play that he made on Patrice Bergeron, which led to the Buffalo Sabres' goal in the game against Boston, but this right here is a pretty good player profile when you acknowledge that he's at 42 points in 46 games played. He's on pace for a 75-point year, on pace for 29 goals. He currently has 16, which bests his production from last season. And realistically, if you take a look at what Dylan Cozens was 2 years ago, playing in 2020-2021 in his rookie year, sure, the guy had the fantastic World Junior Tournament that we had seen, but he only had 13 points in 41 games played. This season, the guy has more goals than that in roughly the same amount of games. And if I'm going to be honest, I think that this total progression from 13 points in 41 games to 38 points in 79 games to 42 points in 46 games, I think this is such a steep curve that's not really all too common in the NHL nowadays, especially with guys who are in their early 20s. It's kind of mind-blowing to me just seeing how good Dylan Cozens has gotten and how quickly this change ended up happening too. If you had told me that Dylan Cozens would have been this caliber of a player in 2025, for example, you take a time machine back to 2019, you show me the fact that he goes 7th overall, and you're like, okay, by 2025, Cozens is a 75-point player in the NHL. I would have been like, okay, that's great. Like, that's sort of on the route that I feel like is appropriate for this type of a player. But nah, he's like that now. This is like 2-3 years prior to when I thought he'd be able to do this, and if you had told me back in 2019 this is how good he would be in 2023, I would have been like, wow, like that's a really good learning curve for Dylan Cozens, because I didn't really think that he would have that sort of an edge at the NHL level develop that quickly. But when it comes to the other WHL guy, the player taken 10 spots after in PEYTON KREBS, this is a really interesting player right here, mostly because when he was drafted, a lot of people said he should have gone a lot earlier. He was 17th overall, as we had talked about, but all of the scouting outlets, aside from NHL Central Scouting, had him as a pretty much top 10 de facto guy in the 2019 draft. Now, there were injuries that played a part as to why he probably went later. He wasn't able to walk properly, and he's a little bit of a smaller guy compared to Doc and Cozens, who are both a lot bigger. But for PEYTON KREBS in general, the Vegas Golden Knights taking him at 17, I always saw it as a pretty big steal. I saw them alongside of the Avalanche taking Newhook and the Canadiens taking Caulfield, all as very good, high-caliber, elite potential forward steals in that spot in the draft. And you can check the videos that we had made after 2019's draft ended when I just talked about the same things. But either way, PEYTON KREBS had gotten traded over from Vegas into the Buffalo Sabres system. He was acquired in the Jack Eichel trade. It's interesting to note that Alex Tuch and Krebs were both acquired for Jack Eichel here because of the work ethic similarities between the two, but pretty much Krebs was noted out of his WHL days for his absolutely insane motor. He was always going out there working hard. He had a really good playmaking edge to his game as well. He could produce points, and he was a small-ish, feisty kind of guy who had leadership qualities. He was the captain of the Kootenay turned Winnipeg Ice, and he just kind of got better in the WHL as the years went on. Now, unfortunately, in 2020-2021, when Dylan Cozens made his debut with the Sabres, you had PEYTON KREBS, who didn't play for Vegas because they didn't want him in their lineup, pretty much. They sent him back down for one more WHL season before playing him a total of 9 games in 2021-2022. He had 0 points then, and eventually got traded over to the Sabres, where he put up 22 points in 48 games played. Now, this season, it's not really like PEYTON KREBS' overall point production is fantastic. He's got 12 points in 38 games played, and that's not really all too great of a season, all things considered. However, when you acknowledge what Krebs has done recently, he's got 3 goals in his last 5 games and 4 points in his last 10. When it comes to the way that Krebs has been able to start sniping it as of late, from distance with really powerful wrist shots, and also with some pretty nifty dangles when it gets on breakaways, this is ultimately what you needed out of this type of guy. Sure, the consistency hasn't really been there for most of the season when it comes to producing offense, especially when you compare it to Cozens, but when it comes to the development, the deployment, there seems to be a very good plan with Krebs in general. Here's a comment made on the Sabre subreddit. I'm not reading the username of the person that made it because that's kind of an inappropriate name. I'm kind of wondering where this version of Krebs was half the season, but he's definitely a long-term piece if he can keep playing like this. The reply here then says that Krebs has been learning from Girgensons and Ekposo to play a complete two-way game with confidence. And ultimately, I feel like that's what Krebs needed the most in this season's worth of play, because they had been focusing a lot on developing his off-puck game, his two-way game, making sure that the skills that he had in the WHL translated into the NHL. He was also a really good AHL point producer, too, during the time he had spent in Rochester and in Henderson. But ultimately, when it comes to being an NHL top 6 potential guy, he's got to sort of unlock that mentally first, and that's what we had been seeing these recent few games where he started to take the initiative to score some pretty nifty goals. So at the end of the day, Krebs and Cozens are both 2 WHL guys from the 2019 draft who have been learning and growing and getting better this season, so much to the point that I think Buffalo Sabres fans have 2 top 6 caliber, potentially elite forwards on their hands if they keep it up at this pace. So talk to the comments, your thoughts if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, all your opinions on the two WHL guys. What are your thoughts on Krebs and Cozens, and do you think you're going to spin a trade with the Canadiens to get Kirby Dach anytime soon? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj Rolls 99, and bye.